Hello, it's your boy Joey. This is just a simple tutorial on running a Node.js server, mostly for the benefit of my friend Laika, but I also want this information to be readily available and free, so feel free to share this link with anybody you want. Alright, so first off, I'm going to start with a table of contents. This tutorial is going to be in three parts. Number one, I'm going to show you how to make a very simple website. This is like the most basic knowledge you need to make a website. It's going to take three languages. You're going to need to have an HTML file, a CSS file, and a JavaScript file. And I'll show you how to host that on the internet. For the second part of the tutorial, I'm going to show you how to make a simple app in React.js. React.js is basically Facebook's website builder, and we can also use Node.js to run a server for this, so I'll be showing you how to set up a simple Node.js React server. The third part of the tutorial and final part is going to be the tricky part. This is basically like some really heady knowledge about how to start a MySQL database, connecting that to the React instance, and finally we're going to Dockerize this process. Dockerize basically means we're going to isolate our development pipeline into one sort of set of production sort of instructions, and that's going to be isolated in what we call a container. In this third part, I'm also going to show you how to use the Amazon cloud and basically deploy everything to the cloud. You could also, for example, deploy it to the Microsoft cloud. Part 1. So first off, I just want to say that this video will not be covering payments because maybe later I can do another video on writing a secure payment system. But yeah, that's probably the biggest thing that I won't be covering here. All right, we're all set to go. Let's jump right into it. So first off, we're going to open command prompt cmd, and we'll cd to our working directory, which is on the desktop. So I go dir to see what directory I'm in, and from here I can go cd OneDrive, cd desktop, um, and then to make a new directory, mkdir, mkdir, new project, cd to new project. Next, we're going to type three commands: touch index.html, touch style.css, touch main.js, and you can see that generated the three files here. Um, Index is the entry point for our website's front end. It specifically has to be named index because if our server has an HTML file named index, that is the file that will initially be served to the web page. CSS stands for Cascading Style Sheet. The style sheet is going to determine the styles on our web page or what the elements will look like on the page. JavaScript is used for writing code that will make our website functional. JavaScript um, is the closest to what we think of as a legitimate programming language, since the index and style sheet are pretty straightforward. Most of our attention is going to be focused on the JavaScript file for technical stuff. That being said, all three of these files are essential. I also want to make a really quick note that Java and JavaScript are completely different languages with absolutely no relation to each other. Java is managed by Oracle Corporation and JavaScript is not. JavaScript was going to be called something like netcode, but some geniuses decided that they wanted to write off the popularity of Java. So actually, actually the confusion was intentional, but it does help you to spot the really unexperienced engineers when people make that mistake. So there is that utility. Um, this is what the basic HTML looks like. We're going to add a few more elements to the page here. Uh, one of them being div. Div is like a general page element. We're going to make a few divs and a few buttons. Now we can save the document and drag it to the web browser. And you can see these buttons already appear. We're going to imagine that these buttons represent available parking spots, and all people have to do to reserve a spot is press the button. We'll need to complete the JavaScript file to make these buttons functional, but first, we're going to take a look at the style sheet. Here's the code for the style sheet. I'm not going to spend too much time here, but I wanted to show you that the style sheet is determining the position and color of the page elements, font and text size, etc. I also wanted to explain something about websites on mobile phones because it has to do with the style sheet. It used to be popular for apps to have a normal sort of web page that shows up on desktop, and if you connected on mobile, it would redirect you to a separate mobile version of that site. For example, Facebook.com redirects to m.facebook.com if you're using a phone. But this practice has largely gone out of fashion, and nowadays people use the style sheet to detect whether the user is viewing their page in landscape mode or portrait mode, and the style sheet accommodates for things that way. And this is done using something called media queries, and you can see here an example of that on lines 37 and onward. And now when we save the style sheet, this is what it looks like on the page, and um, you can see how things shift when we resize the window. This method is a lot more popular these days because you don't have to maintain a separate website for multiple devices. So yeah, in this example, the background is turning light green because it's supposed to do that when the width is under 600 pixels. Next, we're going to take a quick look at the JavaScript. All it's doing is it changes the page background to give us some feedback when the user makes a purchase, and it does this by creating an event listener on the button. Now, when we save, we can see our little demo is working up to this point. When I click this button, the page turns pink. When I click this button, the page turns yellow, just as a bit of feedback. But for now, this site only exists on the computer's hard drive. Um, so the next step would I'm going to show you how to upload our little site to GitHub Pages. GitHub Pages is a free option for hosting a small static web page so that anybody can find it using the internet. All we have to do is sign into GitHub, make a new repo. The repo has to be named exactly like this, where we have the account name .github.io, because it only hosts one page per account, so it has to be named exactly like our account. Create repository. And now we can drag our files to the project and commit changes. Let's just refresh, give it a second, and then I'll try going to the URL. And because our file is named index, it will automatically serve the index.html. This is all well and good, but again, this is only a static web page. It's just a front end by itself. We can't host a server like this, and we're going to need a server for the back end in the database. That brings us to the next part where we're going to make use of the Node.js client. Part 2. So for the Node.js client, first we're going to install Node.js, Windows installer. After that, we can go back to our root project folder, npm init, npm install express, npm install react, npm install create react app. And let's just make use of create react app to make our lives easier. So why go with React anyway? React is essentially Facebook's website builder. It's become fairly standard to build apps with React. It's pretty easy and straightforward. Also, our build process with React will give us an added layer of security when we run it through Webpack. I just ran this create React app, my app command, and now create React app is done doing its thing. Um, So we can go to the public folder in my app and replace the index with our code. And here it says, we suggest that you begin by typing cd my app npm start. Let's try it out. Cd my app npm start. And the server is started here with our website. Webpack compiled successfully. Part 3. This next part is where things get a bit more complicated. We're going to set up a MySQL database, and then we're going to connect the database to our React site. Just uh, and just gonna install Docker desktop on Windows, and then I'm going to copy the pull command from hub.docker.com for the MySQL image. Here I can double check that Docker is installed properly by just typing Docker. All right, it's installed. Um, Now we can start from the top and go npm init, yada yada, npm or npm install MySQL, finishing the MySQL installer, and go into program files, MySQL, MySQL server, bin, copy, add to system path, and then we can see that MySQL is installed by running MySQL. And then using the MySQL shell, you can then use commands like create table, after you create the database. Um, you can delete the table with drop table, and then selecting content from the table is with the select command. And then on the JavaScript side, this is like an example of how we would use Express and SQLize to send MySQL queries to the database. See, this one is delete, update, find all. So now we know that the database is connected, which is great. And now we want to put all this on the cloud. But first, I'm going to show you how to Dockerize. We want to Dockerize our build process. And before we do that, I should explain what a container is. Docker has gotten really popular for deploying software because it allows you to solidify your development pipeline into a set of instructions called a Docker file. And this Docker file describes what's called a container, which is sort of like a virtual environment. Um, you don't need Docker, but there are a lot of problems that Docker can solve for you because it defines the exact instructions for deploying. It prevents your underlings from using a different version of Node or a different version of MySQL or something. It makes it easier to maintain stuff, and there are a bunch of other reasons that Docker can save you a lot of headaches. Now, here's the stack that I recommend, and I'm gonna share this example of a Docker file running Node, and the Docker Compose file makes things a lot easier too. So this is what that stack looks like. Now, if we were to test this out and deploy our stuff to the cloud, you would sign up for AWS or the Microsoft Cloud. And if I was using AWS, what would happen is um, I would put my credit card info or debit card, and it would charge me $1 to make sure that it was a valid card, and then it would refund that dollar. And at that point, um, I would have access to AWS for free for a month. And then if I wanted to permanently host my app on the cloud, I could run it for like pennies every month. So this is a good option, and I'm sure Microsoft Cloud works the same. So after I'm signed up for AWS, I would get an EC2 instance, and that would show up in this instances list here. And then we would do what's called SSH using something like PuTTY, where we could go through command line and then pretty much remotely run command line to this cloud instance. Um, and it costs pennies to host it this way due to the magic of the cloud. Um, that's it for this tutorial, and I can go into more detail on some of this stuff, but I thought this would be a good point to end it. So, bye bye for now. Take care.